Time's up. It's been a minute. It has been a minute. Awesome. I want to wait till it's awkward. Yeah, Bueller. Who said that? Was that Chuck Nettles? Chuck Nettles. What's up, Hill City? How's everybody doing this morning? Awesome. Hey, my name is Ben. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, I have the honor of getting to be one of the members of our staff here and serve alongside Pastor Zach. How talented is your lead pastor leading worship this morning? You know, we have this teaching team model, so my man can take a weekend off, and he chooses another way to work. So we appreciate you, Pastor Zach. I love when you lead worship. It would be remiss of us not to mention that it is Memorial Day weekend, and so I just wanted to take a second and honor those who have and are giving their lives to keep us free. You may have somebody in your family, you may have served yourself, or perhaps know somebody who gave their life serving our country. And I recognize that our country's not without issues. It's not perfect, but I do believe still today that it is the best man-made system for governing the world, and it's worth fighting for. So for those of you who have or know somebody in your family or a friend or a neighbor who is paying the ultimate price or has paid the ultimate price to protect our freedoms, I just want to say thank you. Your church honors you, and we're truly, truly grateful. So, it's good. So it's Memorial Day weekend, and I was trying to figure out, I know a lot of you, I don't know everybody, and how do I introduce myself? And so, but I've been in my head a lot lately because we were sitting at dinner a couple weeks back as a family, and I have a 16-year-old going on 17, I got a 14-year-old going on 15, and I got a 12-year-old going on 13. So that means I got a lot of opinions around the table. And we were sitting at the table, and it was kind of like in unison. I don't know who started it, but at some point somebody goes, "You know, Dad, all of our friends think you're intimidating." And I was like, it hit me. I'm like, I think I'm pretty approachable. And they're like, "Well, you always have your boots on and pants and a black T-shirt." I'm like, "I do not." And I'm like, "Oh, that's what I wore today." So it's kind of my favorite wardrobe. And then I got to thinking, I'm like, wait, how in the world? It's like my kids in unison were like, all of our friends, like a plurality of people feel this way about me. And I'm like, you're not in the same grade. You don't even go to the same school. So you guys are like, your friends are telling you stuff, and then you're coming home and having like meetings in the basement about it. And now you've decided to announce that to me now. So here's what I would say. If I don't smile after this moment, I love you. I'm your friend. But maybe my face will say something different. So, but Memorial Day, man, I got one funny story. I think I got time for it. I have a Memorial Day story for you. We were in Florida on vacation. We lived in Florida, but we took a vacation to the other coast, and we were I got word that SpaceX was going to launch a rocket, and I'm really into like that type of stuff. Like, I think that's cool, and I wanted to go see the rocket launch. So I found the place that we should go, and my oldest, Danica, and my middle son, Landon, they were up for going. Now, keep in mind as I tell you this story, this is years ago, so they're much littler than they are now. Like, Danica might have been 10, Landon was probably 7 or 8. So they're little, so give me grace. This may reflect poorly on my parenting, but I blame young kids. So I found the place that we should go to watch the rocket launch, and it was this park alongside a river. We were miles away, but it was going to be in the middle of the night, like a 3 a.m. launch, so we wanted to get there early. The park was small, and a rocket launch is going to light up the whole night sky. So on the way in to this little town where we were going to watch the rocket launch, I realized, like, man, everything's going to be closed. I've got young kids, parents, you know what that means. We got to do the potty break thing first, right? So I was like, anybody got to go? Nope, nobody had to go. I was like, are you sure? Because I have to go. And no, we don't have to go. I'm like, everything is closing. There will be nowhere to go to the bathroom. And so they're like, no, we don't got to go. So we get our spot at the park, and we're watching and kind of waiting for the rocket. And we've got a lot of time to go. And so, kids are being kids, kind of horsing around in the park or whatever. And they come back, and my daughter goes, "Hey, Landon has to go to the bathroom." And I'm like, well, that's why we talked about it 3 hours ago. And so I was like, well, we don't have a whole lot of choice. So I was like, Danica, because this is what you do when you're a little embarrassed. There's a lot of people in this park, by the way. Like, everybody had the same idea. So I said, I'm running out of time. So I sent Landon this is Memorial Day weekend. This is why I'm telling this story. So I send Danica with Landon to go find a corner in the park to go to the bathroom. I didn't have a lot of options, so don't judge me. Like, I promise you there wasn't a lot. There was no 24-hour sheets. There was nothing. Like, it was in the middle of nowhere. So it felt. So they come back, and they're like, oh, yeah, we found a spot. So we sit around, we watch the rocket launch. It's awesome. It's time to leave. And the kids are kind of playing around, and they come back to me, and they give me a balloon. And I was like, where in the world did you get a balloon? And they're like, well, it was over there. People left a bunch of junk over there, and there was a balloon where Landon peed. And I was like, let me go see what this is all about. So I go check the corner, and there, sure enough, there's some stuff, but it's not junk. There was a balloon, there were some flowers, there was American flags, and there was a plaque memorializing somebody who had given their life to serve our country. And that was the spot they picked to go to the bathroom. So that's horrible. And I'm a bad dad. But if at any point today you're like, Ben doesn't smile, just remember that story, because I laughed a lot. Hey, we're going to continue on in this short series, this question and answer series, where we've been letting you guide the content for the day. And we got a handful of questions, something that sounded like this. Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? What am I supposed to do with my life? What is the meaning of life? Why do I feel dissatisfied or unfulfilled in my life? How's that for a transition, by the way? We're just going to pretend like that never happened. Does my life even matter? And so I love that question. If you're taking notes, the title for today is the question that everybody is asking. It's the question that everybody's asking, and I really do believe that these questions of purpose and calling, it is a question. It is a topic that so many of us wrestle with, young and old, all through our lives. And I particularly love this question because it's a question I've wrestled with a lot. And I spent years trying to figure this out in my own life. Quick bio on me. I felt called to ministry. I grew up in a Christian home. Never have a season where I really ran from God necessarily. Had a lot of seasons where I didn't know what it meant to have a relationship with Him personally. But I didn't really run from God. Got into my high school years, got connected to the youth group, and felt God kind of T-bone my life and say, hey, wherever you thought you were going, I got something different in mind. Felt called to ministry, but I ended up in college, going to business school. Ended up building a career in the marketplace, starting our family, and really was wrestling with this question of why do I feel called to ministry, but my life is going in a different direction? Anybody ever relate to that? You feel one thing in your heart, but life is going in another way? That's how I spent a lot of my life. And so for a decade, 10, 12, 13 years, I'd wake up in the morning with a little bit of a pit in my stomach, feeling like something's not right. Like I'm not fulfilled in life. And I found myself wrestling with questions like the one that maybe you're wrestling with today. And I think it's true that we all ask. We all want to know, what's the meaning of life? What's this life all about? What's my purpose in life? How do I find it? Is there greater meaning? Will I ever find fulfillment? And sadly, I think that too many of us settle for kind of a so-so life without ever getting that question answered. Author and pastor Erwin McManus says this: every one of us have these intrinsic cravings. He says we have these intrinsic cravings, intimacy and destiny and meaning, because they're soul cravings. They're soul cravings. There's nothing wrong with you if you're wondering about your destiny and the meaning of your life. It's actually you could consider it part of the fingerprint of God on your soul. In other words, we are wired to need purpose. We're wired to need purpose, to need destiny, to find meaning for our lives. And when we don't have it, I promise you this, you'll find anything to get it. You'll work more, to earn more, to buy more, to gather more, to eventually just die with it all. And in America, we call that the American dream. And too many of us find ourselves in this mode of living a life that we just don't really like. Like if we're just being honest with it, we might have everything but feel like we have nothing, because the thing that you need most that God imprinted upon your soul is fulfillment. And so we'll use all these things around us to medicate us. And so I just want you to know there is an answer to this question that we're all asking, how to solve the soul's cravings, but it might not sound exactly like you expect it to sound. And so we're going to look at the story of a man named Nehemiah. Everybody say Nehemiah. Perfect. Y'all sound great today. Nehemiah is a character in the Bible. He has a book named after him, and in fact, his story is only told in the book of Nehemiah. Here's what you need to know about Nehemiah. He worked for a king. He served the king, lived with the king, was in the king's palace. I'm pretty sure it says palace. I like to think castle with moat and alligators, but we don't really see that so much in his story. But he lived with the king, wherever the king lived. And his job was, he was what they called a cupbearer. If you don't know what a cupbearer was, we don't have those today necessarily, but a cupbearer was the guy. So assassination was a real thing back in the day, and they were always like one way you'd overthrow a government was you'd kill the king. So the king would hire a cupbearer to come and test the food and test the drink to make sure it hadn't been poisoned before he eats it. So that's your job as the cupbearer. High risk, right? But high reward. Like he gets to live in the castle. All of his needs are taken care of. Like he really has no reason to be unhappy in life. He's going to be protected. He's alongside the king. He has the king's ear. Like it's a pretty good seat to sit in. And so what happens, though, pretty early on in the story in chapter 1, and I'm going to take you through this pretty quickly in terms of the story. We'll slow down in a few verses. But what happens is that he finds out that his hometown, Jerusalem, had come under attack. And Jerusalem was surrounded by a great wall, but the wall had been breached, and the gates, the wooden gates that protected the enemies from entering, had burned down. And in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4, it says this, and this is kind of Nehemiah writing it in the first person. He says, as soon as I heard these words about the wall being torn down, being breached, he says, I sat down and I wept. He cried about it. And it says that he mourned for days. Like this wall coming down wrecked him. And it's not because he has like a particular affinity for walls or anything like that. It was because he knew that God had given over that city to its enemies because of their rebellion. So God's people had turned their back on God. God turned his back on his people, allowed the city to be overcome. And this is really weighing on Nehemiah. And so in chapter 2, he approaches the king. And the king, I'm sure he's coming up to test the food for the day. And the king goes, hey, what's wrong with you? He says, what's wrong? He sees that he's sad. He sees that he's struggling, maybe even with depression. And the king says, what? You're not sick, so what could possibly be wrong? In other words, you have everything in life that you could want to have. You're with me. We're in the palace. You're safe. Your wealth is taken care of. You got a good job. Risky, but you got a good job. What else could possibly be wrong? Why would you be sad since you have it all? And Nehemiah explains to the king the source of his sadness. And he says, listen, my hometown, it came under attack. The enemies have breached the wall. My people are dying. And he's upset about it. And so he asks the king for a letter of passage to go and inspect the damage. He wants to see it for himself because he'd only heard about the second hand, and CNN wasn't on the airwaves yet. So he wants to go for himself, and then he goes to inspect it, and eventually, sorry, Fox News, now you can laugh. And so he says that, Newsmax, come on, somebody. Pick your poison. It's all bad. So they, what was I talking about? Oh, the king, the wall. Yeah, he goes to inspect it, and then as he goes to inspect it, he actually goes and he asks the king, he's like, hey, I'm particularly burdened by this. Would you permit me to rebuild the wall? Now, this is no small project, rebuilding this wall. It's a giant wall that surrounds a whole city. Don't think about the fence in your backyard. Don't even think about a wall so great that, never mind. It's not that either. But it's a big wall, block, and it's thick, and it's tall. And so he's going to take on this project, and he goes and he begins to cast vision to the people in the city, and they reject him. They're like, you're crazy. Why would we do that? It's not worth the effort. We've already been... So they're like mocking him. The Bible says that he was despised because of this vision he had, this burden that he had to rebuild the wall. So for the next 3 or 4 chapters, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, what we see is Nehemiah is facing more opposition. There's actually a conspiracy to kill Nehemiah. How's that for irony? He's supposed to protect the king from being killed, and now people are trying to kill him. Bet he that he had a cupbearer. And so there's a conspiracy to kill him. More hard work, more labor, every day, just another brick in the wall. Come on, Pink Floyd fans. And then in chapter 6, I got one clap. Chapter 6. Are you guys having fun? I'm having fun. Good. Chapter 6, verse 15. Look at what happens. He hits a milestone. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of some name I won't say right, in 52 days. Whoa. My man rebuilt the wall in 52 days, the wall that had likely taken years to build to that point. And he gets the job done in 52 days. And our tendency is to stop here and to look at Nehemiah's life and to look at the story and commend him for his leadership and his vision. And it's easy to stop here and say something like, wow, Nehemiah discovered his purpose. He discovered and fulfilled his purpose. But I want you to know today, that is a giant misunderstanding that many of us have about the Bible and about our lives, that somehow your life's purpose is going to be wrapped up in summarized in some sort of single significant accomplishment. Your purpose is so much bigger than a singular moment in time. And if we look beyond the completion of the wall, God is doing something so much bigger in this moment. It may have even been completely lost on Nehemiah, but there's a bigger story. There's a greater narrative happening, and Nehemiah was just a vessel in this moment to accomplish that. And so if we look beyond the fortifying of the wall, if we look beyond his abilities, he had this greater purpose. And this wall is nothing more than an object that God is going to use to accomplish his purposes. Let's just go one verse further and see what that looks like. In verse 16, right after the announcement of the proclamation, the wall is done. Look what verse 16 says. When all of our enemies, which means God's enemies, when all of God's enemies heard this, all, not some, not the closest ones, all of the nations around us were afraid, and they fell greatly in their own esteem. Here's why. For they perceived that the work had been accomplished with the help of God. Nehemiah's enemies, God's enemies, recognized that the speed at which the wall had been rebuilt was a sign that God was moving and that he was on their side. Nehemiah's purpose was never about a wall. It was about a people that God was trying to reach. And it led to full-blown revival in this nation. Exiled people returned home. The people of Israel confessed their sins and turned their faces back towards God. They renewed their covenant with him. Listen, this is total national reform, the very thing that all of us are believing for probably in our nation. It's happening here. This is not a story about a wall. It's not even a story about Nehemiah. It's a story about God and what God is all about. God has a greater purpose here than simply rebuilding a wall. He was reclaiming a nation unto himself. So the question that we're asking today, it often comes in different forms, right? Like, why am I here? What's the purpose? What's my life's meaning? What should I do with my life? And I want to try and sort those questions out, because sometimes what we do is we confuse three things and we lump it all into one big pot like jambalaya. And I want to try and deconfuse some things that I think we confuse ourselves about. So I'm going to answer your question with a question. If the question is, what is my life all about? Here's the question I'd ask you. Are you confusing calling or assignment with your purpose? Because they are not the same thing. Your calling and your assignment are not the same as your purpose. Your calling is like it's like your vocation. It's like your job. It's the thing you were designed to do. Nehemiah, his calling was to serve the king, and that was his vocation. Calling answers the question, what was I designed to do? So if that's the question you're wrestling with today, what was I designed to do? Here's how I'd answer that. I would say, look at your design, your personal design, your makeup. The gifts, the talents, the abilities, the skills that God has placed inside of you. I'd say look at your design, if that's your question, because I think your design will help to reveal your destiny. As you start to understand what it is in life that you're passionate about, that you're gifted towards, that you're burdened about. That's what God has created you to do. Ephesians 2:10 says that for we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to accomplish good works that God prepared beforehand. That idea of workmanship means that there's this blueprint, this design that God perfectly made you the way that he needs you to be, not just to survive in life, but for this very moment in life. And then he placed you right where he needs you to accomplish that purpose. So if you're wondering, what was I made to do? Look at your design. Look at how God made you. So many of us are waiting for like a burning bush moment that's going to show up somehow and explain to us, go do this and go do that. As near as I can tell, and I've read this thing a few times, there is only one burning bush story in this entire book. But there are countless stories of overnight success stories that are 30 years in the making as people jump into a process of being developed and being discovered. I think about Joseph, not Jesus' stepdaddy. I'm talking about Joseph with the rainbow-colored starter jacket, the one who had a dream that one day he would lead a nation of people and that he would be an authority over his brothers. And he has this dream, and it sends him on a journey, not straight to the palace, but at first to a pit. He gets thrown in a pit, sold off for slavery. And then he ends up going, and there's so much to his story, but he ends up in a jail at one point, and then he ends up in Potiphar's house, who was like a big leader. He gets accused of rape, and then, all the while, here's what's happening. God is putting skills inside of him that he does not know he needs, and he's beginning to understand his design. He realizes, he encounters people who are having dreams, and he realizes that God has placed a gift in his heart to see the dreams and to be able to interpret them. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, there's only one burning bush, but a lot of us will find out, and it can take some time when you're thinking about trying to discover your design and what your calling should be. But if you'll embrace the process, you'll begin to see and to discover who God made you to be. And that's the story of Joseph. And eventually, he does get to a place of great authority. But it's not because he just had a desire in his heart. It's because he embraced the process of discovering out what his calling was. Calling, we confuse that with purpose all the time. The second thing we confuse is our assignment. Our assignment. Well, what's the difference? Well, let me use Nehemiah. Nehemiah's calling was to serve the king, but his assignment was the cupbearer. Let me just be very clear with you. He did not go online and apply for the cupbearer job. He grew up. He got a job in the palace somehow. He was seen and noticed, and he probably held a bunch of jobs until he reached this assignment of being the cupbearer. And then he abandons that assignment because God's leading him to a new assignment to rebuild this wall. So if calling answers the question, what was I designed to do? Assignment answers the question, where should I do what I was designed to do? So if you're wondering, like, well, should I take this job or that job? Should I go to this school or to that school? Where should I go to college? Here's my answer. You're going to love it. I have no idea. I have no idea. And this book isn't going to answer that for you either. It's assignments in your life as opportunities come and opportunities go. But you know what God did? He gave us himself in the form of Holy Spirit to support us in life with many things, but certainly to lead us and to guide us and to speak to us. Because only he can answer these questions for us. Pastor Zach has this phrase he uses that I think is so brilliant when you're in the process of evaluating an assignment for your life, a new direction, a shift in direction. He says, just let peace be the umpire. I love that. Don't go anywhere that peace doesn't lead you. As you're praying, as you're processing this relationship, this job, this opportunity, this investment, that investment. As you're praying about it, and I'm not talking about just anybody. I'm talking about, like, man, if you love Jesus, if you're trying your best to live your life for him, if your heart is directed and oriented towards his heart, man, you can trust that still quiet voice in your heart of peace. People ask me all the time, because the job that I have, Pastor Zach gets this, all of us get this as pastors. They come in and they want to meet with you, and they have specific questions that I cannot and will not answer. Because it's not my job. The Holy Spirit will speak to you. Calling and assignment answer the questions what and where, but purpose answers the question why. So the answer to the question that I think everybody's asking kind of depends on what version of the question you're asking. If your question is what or where, man, the Bible's not going to answer those specifically. But if your question is why am I here, the Bible answers that resounding and clearly. If your question is what is the meaning, what's the purpose of my life, then the Bible's really, really clear on that. Most of the time when I get questions like this around this idea of purpose, people are coming at it with good hearts, but from the wrong perspective. Does that make sense? So many of us have a fundamental misunderstanding about God. We have a misunderstanding about the Bible, about faith in our lives. Let me tell you, I hope this might upset some of your theology, but let me just set something straight for you. God is all about one thing. God is all about God. The Bible is all about God. And God is first and foremost about his glory. And so on the way to answering the question, what is the purpose of my life, you have to answer the question, what isn't the purpose of my life? And here's a hint, it's not about you. The purpose of your life is not about you. And the reason that most of us never find an answer to that question is because we start with the wrong person. We start with us, when really we should be starting with God. Listen, I love you, and I love you enough just to tell you the way it is. Focusing on yourself will never reveal your life's purpose, and it will never give you fulfillment. Let me say it a different way. If you're living your life right now and you feel apart from purpose or fulfillment, I would venture to guess that your life is oriented in the wrong direction. Dr. Hugh Moorhead said it like this: the easiest way to discover the purpose of an invention is to ask the inventor. And since none of us, to my knowledge, created ourselves, you can't tell yourself what you were created for. Life isn't about building a wall, a career, a family, or even a legacy. That's not the why. That may be a part of your story, but it's not the why to your life. Colossians 1:16 says this, for by him, by God, I love this verse. For by him, all things except cats were made. All things, me, you, your house, fluffy cows, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority. All things, here it is. This is the key. We're going to answer our question. All things were created through him, by his hand. He made it all, and they were all created for him. God is about God. He created everything for him, and then he uses us, and he changes our lives, and it makes people think, not how awesome is Zach, how awesome is Ben, how awesome is John. It causes people to think, how awesome is their God? So God uses us to draw people unto him, not unto us. So if you don't remember anything else I say today, here's what I want you to write down. Colossians is so clear. It's all created by him and for him. Here's the purpose of your life. Write this down. Write it, imprint this on your heart. This will help you on the hard days and it will empower you on the good days. The purpose of your life is to allow God to use your life for his purposes. Period. That's your why. That's why he created you. The purpose of your life is to allow God to use your life for his purposes. And that's what's happening in this story with Nehemiah. He allows God to use his life for God's purposes. Purpose has nothing to do with what you do. It has everything to do with why you do it. And I can't help but wonder if so many of us today are just looking in the wrong place for meaning in our life. We're looking to find, our calling and assignment in hopes that it will bring purpose. That's not how it works. Purpose isn't the fulfillment that comes from finding a vocation or landing your dream job. Purpose is the posture of living your life in a way that allows God's purposes to be done through you no matter where you're at, no matter your calling, no matter your assignment. That's what God is up to. Let me say it like this. Your calling does not give your life purpose. Your purpose gives meaning to your calling. We get this wrong all the time. We think about the what and the where, and we think that's what's going to make our life matter, and it has nothing to do with making our life matter. What matters is wherever you are, allowing God to use your life for his purposes. So many of us are caught up looking for specific answers to all of the wrong questions. What career? What college? What person? Listen, they're not bad questions. They're just not the best question. Because when it comes to those specific type of questions, I can tell you this. Here's what I've been wrestling with. I wonder if God gives us a lot more latitude and leeway with what and where than we could even imagine. Because Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, here's how you should do it. Work heartily as unto the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive your inheritance as a reward. What if the answer to the question of what should I do and where should I go, what if the answer is wherever, whatever, so long as you allow God to use you in the space and the place that he has you. Calling and assignments, those are all variable, but purpose is constant because that's how the Creator made you. He made you because he needs you and he invites you into being a part of his purposes. And when we know that our purpose is to use our lives in partnership with God, then we realize that even the most mundane of moments have eternal potential. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying maybe the best question we could ask ourselves today sound like this. In my parenting, am I partner with God's purposes in teaching my 3 kids how to love people, how to hear God's voice, be sensitive to the Holy Spirit, so that when they leave my house, they can follow God on their own? That's what partnering with God's purposes looks like in this part of my assignment. In my job, in my marriage, is it a reflection of Jesus' love towards the church? Because that's the commandment. And if it's not, then I'm just not partnered with God's purposes in that assignment of my life. You see the difference? In my job, am I allowing God to use me? Am I good? Am I a good character? Am I of good character? Am I a good witness? Am I a hard worker? Do people look on and say something's different? When the gossip circle's firing up, am I leaning out? Am I looking in those moments of mundane meetings and asking myself, God, what's my responsibility in this meeting for you? Is there somebody you need me to love? Somebody you need me to speak into? Somebody you need me to hug? In the finances that God provides as a result of your vocation, are they partner with God's purposes? God's doing a lot on this earth, but it's not free. And he invites us to participate in his purposes through our finances. My free time and my hobbies, is there any piece of that that is directed towards God's purposes? See, nothing clarifies calling like a purposeful life. And we can live a life of purpose even when we're still discovering our calling. Even when we're in an assignment that seems like it might be temporary. It's not, I'm at McDonald's right now. Okay, cool. But you can be purposeful in that. You can find fulfillment in that and that not be your destiny, not be your long game. But God can use you in that. And allowing God to use your life for his purposes is the only thing that will bring you fulfillment in life. And I'm telling you that because I love you, and I'm telling you that because I did it wrong for a whole bunch of years. I thought that a particular job or an assignment or stepping into ministry, I thought that would bring me fulfillment. And when I woke up in the morning, when I was finally in vocational ministry, and I woke up with that same pit of unfulfillment in my stomach, I realized something was off, that I had misunderstood, that I thought calling and assignment were all there was. But there's purpose to allow God to use your life for his purposes. I think it's so interesting that Nehemiah is never mentioned anywhere else in the Bible outside of the book that bears his name. No references to him. He's not in the great hall of fame of faith. To my knowledge, they don't name the wall after him. His grave doesn't say, "Here lies Nehemiah, the greatest contractor, leader, and wall builder of all time." Last words in his book, and he's never mentioned again because his legacy wasn't a wall. It was a people. God used him to change the direction of a nation in that moment and to be part of the setup for the birth, development, ministry, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, because he simply allowed God to use his life for his purposes. Just following that burden, operating in his calling, being faithful, yielding to new assignments as he felt led. And God used him to do something significant. Here's the decision that all of us can face, I think we all face today. You can continue to live a life that you don't like. I want you to know that's an option on the table. You can continue to live a life that you don't like, that doesn't have for any fulfillment. You can have it all and wake up every morning feeling like you have nothing. But today isn't an invitation to a job or a dream or a relationship. It's an invitation to reflect on your life and ask yourself the question, am I trying to find fulfillment in something other than allowing God to use my purposes? If yes, then what would it look like to begin to allow every aspect, every dimension of my life to start to filter that through the lens of, God, am I partnered with your purposes in this area of my life? Because that's what God's all about. Your purpose will never be apart from people, because that's what God's about. He's about himself and drawing people back to him and then using those people to draw others to him. That's what God's up to. So if parts of your life aren't up to that, I would submit to you today that you're not too old and you're not too young to begin to start to feel and taste fulfillment. And I lived a lot of years of my life feeling unfulfilled, not realizing that the opportunity was before me every day, and I was missing it because I was caught up on looking for my calling, and I was caught up on looking for an assignment and evaluating those and the next best assignment and the promotion and the job and the opportunity and the planning of the church and all these things. And none of it will offer you fulfillment until you truly recognize that my life and all of its dimensions are submitted to God's purposes. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? I just want to create a space. I'm 2 minutes over. I realize that. I want to just create 15 seconds. I just want you to ask the Lord. One of my favorite prayers in the Bible is, "Search my heart, O Lord. Let him show you if there's any spot of your life where you're not yielding to his purposes." Father, I pray right now, God, for everybody in this room, those maybe listening online or those who will listen later. Father, I pray that this message, that your words would refocus and redirect folks' heart towards your heart. God, I pray that people would feel challenged to evaluate, is their life partnered with your purposes? And if not, what does it mean to change? And then, God, we know that you are so gracious and so loving that you equip us with the power to change, not apart from you, but with you. And so, God, I pray that this would be a catalyst, a beginning for life change in each person in this room, for young and old. Man, if you're still breathing, your purpose is still the same. I want to say one more thing. Keep your eyes closed. I think this might just be for somebody. If you're here today and you feel like your life, you feel there's something greater for your life in one direction, but your life is oriented in a different direction, I feel like the Lord just wants me to tell you to stay committed to the process of what he's doing, because he's developing you. He's building a resume for you that you don't even know you need yet. And in his timing and in his strength and in his grace, he will intersect. This is how miraculous and efficient he is. He will intersect two lines that are seemingly going in the opposite direction. He will bring them together. And he will be the only one that gets to take credit for it, and people will look on and say, only God could have done that in your life. So if that's you, I just want to encourage you, don't jump to the other line and try and do it your own way. We see a lot of stories in the Bible of people who try and do things in their own strength and their own time. Allow God to develop you, much like the life of Joseph, and see what he has in store for you. Amen? Awesome. We love you guys. Hey, we're going to break into discussion groups real briefly. We're going to throw up a video for you to get instructions around that. And then right after that, we'd ask you to...
Now it's time for our 10-minute discussion.